Have you ever been at the grocery store, the pediatrician's waiting room, or a family dinner and watched your baby lock eyes with a complete stranger and just not let go? They stare, intensely, unblinking, like that person is the most fascinating thing they have ever seen in their entire short life. And you're sitting right there, the person who feeds them, holds them, knows every sound they make. And your baby is looking past you at someone they've never met. And you've probably wondered what is going on inside that small head. Most parents laugh it off. Some feel a little strange about it, but almost no one has ever been told what is actually happening in the brain during those moments. Because what researchers have uncovered about infant staring behavior isn't just interesting. It is one of the most sophisticated cognitive processes ever documented in a human being who cannot yet hold their own head up. And by the time you finish watching this, you will never see that blank, locked-in stare the same way again. Before I take you inside the science of what that stare actually means, I need to ask you something first. Think about the last time your baby did this. Not just a glance, a real, sustained, locked-in stare at someone they didn't know. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from, and how old is your baby today? And tell me this, did the stranger react? Did they wave, smile, make a face? And what did your baby do next? I read every single comment. What you describe helps me understand exactly which part of this video matters most to the person watching it. So take 10 seconds and leave that for me right now. Here is what you have actually been watching when your baby stares at a stranger. You have been watching a scientist at work. Not metaphorically, literally. Because what developmental researchers at Yale University's Infant Cognition Center have documented over the past 2 decades is that when an infant stares at an unfamiliar face, they are not spacing out. They are not startled. They are not confused. They are running one of the most computationally demanding processes a young human brain is capable of. They are building a social model of a person they have never encountered, from scratch, in real time, using only what their eyes can send to a brain that is, at that moment, growing at a rate of roughly 700 new neural connections per second. Every second that your baby spends locked onto a stranger's face, something is being added to an internal database that your baby has been building since the first days of life. A database not of words, not of objects, not of places, but of people, what they look like, how they move, what their face does when it shifts from neutral to expressive, whether they are safe, whether they are a threat, whether they are someone worth knowing. And your baby is making all of these determinations simultaneously, without language, without experience, and without any of the social scripts that adults rely on to navigate a room full of people they don't know. Think about what you do when you walk into a room full of strangers. You scan. You look for familiar faces. You make rapid judgments about who to approach, who to avoid, who seems friendly. You do this in seconds, and it feels automatic. But it took you decades to build the neural hardware that makes that possible. Your baby is building that hardware right now. And the staring, that wide, unblinking, seemingly rude intensity that makes you want to apologize to the stranger, that is the construction happening in real time. You are watching the architecture go up. And what the research is very specific about is what exactly your baby is looking for when they look at a face they have never seen before. There are 4 things the infant brain prioritizes when encountering a new face. Researchers have isolated each of them through careful observation studies. And knowing what they are changes how you interpret every single stare your baby has ever aimed at another person. The first is structural familiarity, whether the face follows the basic template of a face that the brain has already coded as safe. Eyes above a nose, above a mouth, in the right proportions, oriented the right way. The infant brain has been trained on this template since birth, and possibly before, through prenatal sound-based social modeling that researchers at the University of Helsinki have only recently begun to fully understand. When a face matches the template, the brain signals interest. When it deviates significantly, a face partially in shadow, a face at an unexpected angle, the brain signals caution. The stare changes quality. You can see it if you know what to look for. But there is something that precedes all of this. Something happening in the very first seconds of contact that most parents have never been told about. And it involves a part of the brain that develops earlier than almost any other social structure. That part is where this story truly begins. Let me tell you about Marcus. He was 31 years old, father of a 4-month-old named Isla, and he had started to notice something that was making him genuinely uneasy. Every time his mother-in-law visited, a warm, energetic woman who adored Isla, the baby would stare at her with an expression Marcus could only describe as serious, not fearful, not upset, just intensely, unreadably focused, in a way that she never stared at him or at his wife. His mother-in-law thought it was funny, but Marcus had been watching it for 3 weeks, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about how Isla looked at her compared to everyone else. He mentioned it to their pediatrician. The response was brief and reassuring. Babies stare at things that interest them. Nothing to worry about. That answer was accurate, but it missed something the research has been documenting for years. Something that explains not just what Isla was doing, but why she was doing it specifically with that face, in that way, at that age. A research team at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm spent 4 years studying the gaze behavior of 214 infants between the ages of 6 weeks and 9 months. What they were looking for was not just how long babies stared at unfamiliar faces, but what specific features of those faces commanded the most sustained attention. And what they found was not what they expected. The feature that received the longest and most consistent attention was not the eyes, as previous research had suggested. It was not the mouth, which generates the most movement and expression. It was the space between those features, the overall configuration of the face, specifically how much it diverged from the faces the baby had already processed as familiar. In other words, your baby is not staring at a stranger's eyes or nose. Your baby is staring at the gap between who that person is and everyone else your baby already knows. They are measuring difference. And in measuring difference, they are expanding the map. Every face that diverges from the familiar cluster adds a new data point to the social model your baby is building. And that model, built face by face, stare by stare, in grocery stores and waiting rooms and family dinners, becomes the foundation of your baby's social intelligence. The research from the Karolinska team found that infants who were exposed to a higher diversity of unfamiliar faces in the first 6 months showed measurably stronger facial recognition accuracy at 12 months than infants with more limited social exposure. Not stronger attachment, not better development in other domains. Specifically socially, stronger. The staring was not random, it was learning. And the more faces there were to stare at, the better the learning became. But here is where the finding becomes something else entirely. Something that changes what you think you know about what your baby is actually assessing when they look at someone new. Because the research didn't stop at facial recognition. What the follow-up study found, 2 years later, is the part no parenting book has ever explained. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly before you scroll past. Has your baby ever stared at a stranger and then looked back at you, just for a second, before returning to that face? That quick glance back? Did you notice it? Tell me in the comments, because that behavior has a name, a mechanism, and a significance that most parents have never heard. And what I'm about to show you in the next few minutes is built entirely around that single moment. Don't leave now. This is the part that changes everything. Here is what almost nobody knows, and it is the reason this video exists. When your baby stares at a stranger and then looks back at you, that is not distraction. That is not reassurance seeking in the way most people understand it. That is one of the most sophisticated social behaviors in the entire developmental repertoire of a pre-verbal human being. It is called social referencing, and it was documented with precision by Dr. James Source and his colleagues at the University of Colorado in a series of studies that have since been replicated across cultures, across continents, and across decades of infant research. Here is what social referencing actually is. When your baby encounters something new, a face, an object, a situation, and the information their own brain has gathered is insufficient to categorize it as safe or unsafe, interesting or threatening, approach or avoid, they turn to you. Not for comfort, for data. They look at your face specifically to read your emotional response to the thing they are looking at. And they use your response to calibrate their own. If you look relaxed, your baby is more likely to continue engaging with the stranger. If you look tense or alarmed, your baby is more likely to pull back. If you smile and say something warm, your baby's brain processes that as a social endorsement, and the stranger moves up in the ranking of faces worth engaging with. The research from Dr. Source's team showed that infants as young as 8.5 months will cross a visual cliff, a glass surface over an apparent drop, if their mother's face showed a positive emotional expression when the baby looked back for information. They will refuse to cross if the mother looked fearful. They are not being timid. They are being intelligent. They are consulting the most reliable source of social information in their world, your face, and acting on what they find there. And this mechanism, this quiet, quick, over-the-shoulder consultation, is running every single time your baby stares at someone they don't know. It is not a behavior that develops at 8 months and then disappears. It begins earlier than researchers initially expected. And it means something about the relationship between you and your baby that no amount of parenting advice has ever captured properly. Your baby doesn't just look at strangers. They look back at you to decide what to think about them. Marcus found out about social referencing 3 weeks after his pediatrician's reassuring non-answer. He came across a summary of the source studies while looking for something else entirely. And when he read the description of what the behavior actually was, he did what a lot of parents do when they encounter a piece of science that clicks. He sat very still for a moment, because he realized something. Every time Isla stared at his mother-in-law and then looked back at him, not at his wife, not at the grandmother herself, at him, he had been responding in the same way each time. He had been watching his mother-in-law with an expression he couldn't entirely control. Not hostility, not dislike, just a particular kind of attention that was not the same as the worn ease he felt with his own family. And Isla had been reading that expression every single visit and filing it, not as a verdict, not as a permanent categorization, but as information, as data, as one more data point in the social model she was building about the people in her world. When Marcus understood that, he said his first reaction wasn't guilt. It was something closer to awe. Not because his daughter was doing something extraordinary, because she had been paying closer attention to him than he had been paying to himself. Now here is what this means for you. Not abstractly, not theoretically, but today, with the baby you have, in the ordinary moments that are already happening. The first thing to understand is that your baby staring is not passive. It is not spacing out. It is not a developmental quirk to be managed or redirected. It is an active process that is actively benefiting from the time you allow it to run. When you wave a toy in front of your baby to redirect them from a stranger they have locked onto, you are interrupting a processing sequence that the brain was running for a reason. Sometimes, the most developmentally supportive thing you can do is let the stare happen. Let the scan complete. Let the data collection finish. And the second thing, the one that matters most, is this. Pay attention to your own face when your baby looks back at you. That moment when they break from the stranger and glance at you, your expression in that moment is not neutral. It is information. Your baby is reading it, and they are reading it with a level of accuracy that research at the University of Washington has shown is present by 4 months of age. Infants as young as 4 months can distinguish genuine positive affect from performed positive affect on a caregiver's face. They can tell the difference between a real smile and a social smile. Not consciously, not verbally, but neurologically, measurably, reliably, they can tell. Which means the expression you give your baby when they look back at you during a social referencing moment is more important than anything you could say out loud. You do not need to perform enthusiasm about every person your baby encounters. You do not need to coach your baby's social responses. What the research suggests is simpler and harder at the same time. Be honest. Be present. Be aware that the face you are making is being read. And know that your baby is using it to build something. There is something worth sitting with here. Something that goes beyond the science, though the science is what points us to it. Every time your baby stares at a stranger and then looks back at you, they are asking you a question they cannot yet put into words. Is this person part of our world? Is this face someone I should know? Is this safe? And you are answering that question not with language, with expression, with posture, with the quality of your attention. You have been answering that question since the first time your baby locked eyes with someone you didn't know. In the supermarket, in the parking lot, at the family dinner table, you have been shaping your baby's social map, one glance back at a time, without knowing that was what was happening. Researchers at UC Berkeley, who have studied the long-term effects of early social referencing patterns, have found associations between the richness of caregiver social signaling in the first year and the quality of social competence at age 3. Not a guarantee, not a formula, but a pattern, a direction. The data is telling us something. And what it is telling us is that your face, your ordinary, unguarded, imperfectly honest face, is one of the most powerful developmental tools your baby has access to. Not your words, not your toys, not the carefully selected enrichment activities. Your face, the one you're wearing right now. If your partner hasn't watched this with you, send it to them now, not because it's interesting, because the next time your baby looks back at one of you in a social moment, you both need to know what they are asking. This is the kind of science that belongs to both people in the room. And here is something the research is still working to fully understand. Something that opens a question rather than closes one. We know that social referencing begins early and shapes early social development. We know that the faces babies stare at most are the faces that differ most from the familiar cluster of people they already know. But what we do not yet fully understand is how the quality of early social referencing experiences influences the way a child eventually learns to read their own emotions, separate from a caregiver's cues. Dr. Sarah Bloom and colleagues are currently examining whether infants who received rich, consistent, emotionally transparent social referencing signals develop more nuanced emotional self-regulation by age 2. The early data is pointing somewhere specific, and that somewhere is the subject of what's coming next on this channel. But for now, what you have already learned is enough to change how you move through the next ordinary Tuesday with your baby. Is there a moment with your baby, a stare, a glance back, an expression you couldn't interpret that you now see differently after watching this? Leave it in the comments, because those moments are not small. They never were. And if you've been the kind of parent who pays close attention, who wonders, who watches, who looks up the thing that didn't quite make sense, you are already doing what the research says matters most. You were already present. You just didn't have the language for what you were seeing. Now you do. If someone in your life is about to become a parent, a friend, a sibling, someone in your birth group, share this with them before their baby arrives. Because understanding this before the first grocery store stare happens is worth infinitely more than understanding it after. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Because what I'm covering next involves something researchers at Johns Hopkins discovered about infant memory that directly connects to everything you just learned, and it will change how you see the first year entirely. Don't let the algorithm bury it before it reaches you. The next time your baby locks eyes with a stranger across a waiting room, you are going to feel it differently. Not as something to manage, not as something to apologize for. Your baby is doing in that moment what humans have always done when they encounter the unknown. They are gathering information, consulting the people they trust, and deciding, carefully, intelligently, wordlessly, what the world is made of. They have been doing this since they were weeks old, and they have been looking back at your face for the answer. That is not a small thing to be trusted with. This channel exists because the science of your baby's inner life is too important to stay inside a research journal, and you deserve to understand every word of it.